Alright, okay, I just start clicking record. We're gonna start the session, and by the way, this document is actually one of the documents that was in the helper website. If you guys don't know, yeah. Well, I did edit a few things here so that it's clearer because I noticed some things weren't that clear, and yeah. So we're gonna review about approaches to researching behavior or research methods today. And before we talk more about research methods, I'm also going to review a little about the purpose, like the basics behind research methods, which is about psychology. What do we do in psychology? And that is, we study behavior and mental processes scientifically. So the keywords are behavior, mental processes, and scientific. So behavior, according to IB, is just observable actions. It can be memory, cognition, actual observable actions, blah blah blah. It's very broad. Um, and mental processes are stuff you think, cognition, mental thoughts. Yeah. And scientific is about reliable knowledge, the type of knowledge that one can describe, where one can describe, explain, or predict, or even control or influence a phenomenon. And specifically for psychology's case, we're talking about describing, explaining, predicting behaviors and mental processes, like why do we do this, why do we do that? Describe it, why that phenomenon happens, when that might happen, and how we can influence it maybe or control it. Um, so where do we start by, making things scientific? We start by theories, and especially good theories. If you want to have a good theory, it should be, it's not in this, okay, it's probably not in this, it should be the the teacup thing. We can go into that later, but this is a review on the basic concept. So theory is something that's based on a hypothesis. It's backed up by evidence, specifically empirical evidence. It should be testable, means like if you replicate experiments, then the results should be roughly similar, and it is based on a few assumptions that defines a way of thinking for behavior. So there are some things that we already assume, like for example, that humans tend to do the same thing, or some behavioral phenomenons come from like evolution, blah blah blah. Um, yeah, and we're gonna go in bit into empirical evidence. Empirical evidence refers to studies, and this has aim, method, procedure, results, conclusion, and evaluation. All these 6 things. Um, okay, so up till here, you don't really have to remember anything, like as long as the basics are okay, then if you get it, that's okay. So we can move on to quantitative and qualitative studies. Methods of conducting a study. So in research methods, there's 2 types of methods, quantitative and qualitative. As its name says, quantitative is studies that involves and collecting numbers and using numbers to show results, to objectively um, demonstrate to objectively show behavior. While qualitative approach uses more of a in-depth, like qualitative, more subjective approach to research. So they have their pros and cons, and we will talk more in depth about them later. And so when we, do these methods, we need some people, right? In order to make an experiment, in order to study people, then we need some people to help volunteer and take part of the experiment. And that's where sampling comes in, because it's not possible to test every single person on the planet. So we would usually take a small sample, small set of people from the population, and in order to take a sample, we do this thing called sampling. So we do different sorts of ways to find individuals um, that can be representative of the population that we want, which is the target population. And from there, um, we can try to, do experiments on this small sample, and from that sample, try to get some results and understand, oh, so this happens, and hopefully from this representative, it can like represent the population, like represent other people, the people that we want to study about. Yeah. And so in a study, it's important that it should be trustworthy. In order for it to be trustworthy, it should have credibility. And if it does not have credibility, if it lacks credibility, then it has bias. Um, well, in reality, because in psychology experiments, there's no black and white. There's no something that's biased, something that's not biased. But everything will be biased, right? Because we're talking about human behavior here. We're just studying our own kind. It cannot be eliminated, but it can at least minimize. So if there's too much bias, then the study would be unreliable. But at least if you minimize it, then maybe to some extent it will be reliable. And that is where generalizability comes in, because if there's not a lot of bias, then maybe the study can be used in other situations. It can be generalized to other populations, um, because it is closer to real life. Yeah. So that's about the general terms that you should remember. You should already be familiar with when it comes to psychology. And so going down, we have some miscellaneous terms. So okay, so just like a quick reminder, this retrospective and prospective part, asking about past behavior, and prospective, measuring a variable in the beginning and watching its effects over time. You don't really need to remember this, just know about it. It's okay, because this will be rarely used in IB psychology. But you may hear some of these terms when we're looking at studies, which is longitudinal research and cross-sectional research. So what are those? Longitudinal research is, longitudinal, long in a long span of time. You do observations of the same variables. So you keep on um, making experiments on doing experiments on the same person over a long period of time. It can be like for a month, for a year, several years. Uh, it has to be on the same group of people and do the experiment several times. That's the key. It because it's long, it can be expensive, but it can have good potential with uh realistically, like, can reflect real life studies better basically. And there's another one that is called cross-sectional research. So because longitudinal studies are expensive AF, they usually sometimes researchers they would just try to collect people's responses from, let's say, different population ages. So they would measure like aggression in 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 60-year-olds, and they directly compare the results at a time. But this kind of research, like collecting these data, can lead to different behavioral results sometimes because different generations experiences different things, so that can be a bit problematic because that can affect how the population generally behaves. Like let's say like people, I think a lot of news they are saying that our generation is significantly much more anxious than the previous generations. So yeah, something like that. Like there's gonna be issues with that. So we're also gonna go into construct and opera oh gosh, operation. No, it's been a while. Oper opera operationalizations. There you go. Operationalizations. So construct is a definition of a variable. Like you explain what a variable is. You try to let me think. Like let's say you try to explain it but in abstract terms, so you don't like let's say love. How do we explain love? Love is something that cannot be directly measured. It expresses affections or something. That's construct. So you define a variable, and it should be based on theory. And I was trying to figure out examples before, but due to lack of time, and some unforeseen circumstances, I didn't make some examples, so I'm just gonna make some on the spot. And operationalizations are expressing the construct in observable behavior. So you try to define love because love is something that cannot be directly measured. Then how do you like observe it in terms of behavior? Like let's say some people may think if I give many gifts, if I say a lot of sweet words to the person I care for, that would be love. And those are some operationalizations. So you define the construct using behavior, the behaviors that you can directly observe. Yeah. Okay. So up till here, is there any questions? Oh, okay. I think household study with the man walking toward an attractive woman and measuring the distance to op- opera opera operationalize love. Is love really measurable in this context? No, no, I don't know why. I was fine. No, actually, I wasn't fine. Like the last time I did the session, and when I was trying to say the word operationalize, but well, it's okay. At least I can say it now in the session. uh, I okay. I don't remember that study clearly, but I don't think that's love. It. What was it measuring love? I'm not sure. I'm sorry, it's been too long. But yeah, I mean, actually, uh, No, this is more of uni content that I learned, and I don't want to get too much into it, but there has been a lot of interesting discussions about operationalizing a, a construct. Maybe we can discuss about it after I finish the research methods if you're really interested. Is it right to say that emotions can't be operationalized because different people express emotions differently? Um, you can. I think that that is a good like argument to put out if you're trying to discuss about over rationalizing the word emotion, like in a study. Because yeah, because sometimes over rationalizing a definition can be a bit problematic. But yeah, there's there's no quantitative way to measure it. Sometimes there's like several definitions of a thing, and yeah, several interpretations of a thing which may be problematic. And I yeah, okay, I'm just gonna we can talk about that again later because I really don't want to get too technical with it. Let's just go back to it later after we're done with this session. Okay, we're gonna hop into ethics. Ethics are moral principles um, that we have to pay attention to when we do research. And the reason why we need to pay attention to ethics is because we're experimenting on humans. And, you know, it's morally incorrect to harm people. And so we should treat people in an ethical manner when we're experimenting on them. Um, so there are two types of ethical considerations. Ethical considerations when we're doing the study, when the study is taking place, and ethical considerations when you're reporting the results. So after the experiment, I think most of the time we will talk about this more. This one is just like mostly additional knowledge because we don't really use it. I mean, like you can use it if you feel like there are some that can be helpful in evaluating your studies, but most of the time it's just this part. So yeah, there is informed consent where you have to make sure that the people in the participants in the study knows that they are voluntarily participating in the experiment and that they know that they are like what they're gonna face when they're being experimented. And also to keep in mind that minors need to take informed consent from parents because they can't consent for themselves. And the age of informed consent, even though it's written like under 16, usually in IB psychology textbooks, it depends on on your respective countries too. So keep that in mind. But it's fine if it's just for the psychology IA, it doesn't matter, just 16. But I mean, like if you're planning to, pursue psychology and do experiments on people, just keep in mind depends on the country. Informed consent fit the whole minor thing. Yeah. So protection from harm, obviously, don't harm people, and this takes forms in physical, mental harm, especially. Um, you also have to pay attention to long-term potential negative consequences because that can be incredibly harmful. If it's just like a little pinch for the sake of like potentially helpful research for the society, then the small pinch isn't anything. But if you're like doing something that's causing PTSD for the participants, then yeah, that's not very good. And of course, anonymity and confidentiality. Make sure to uh, let let the participants know that their identities are protected and their research data will be confidential, so not not linked to the participants. And they should participants should also know, and researchers should also make sure that participants know that participants can withdraw from study anytime if they feel uncomfortable or they just, I don't know, suddenly change their mind or something. Obviously, because it's voluntary in the first place. And sometimes in experiments, for the sake of minimizing biases, deception can be used. Like researchers would lie to participants and secretly record some other behavior behind their backs, for the sake of psychology and science. And sometimes that's okay if it is indeed beneficial, like the result can potentially be beneficial. Um, but yeah, that should go through the ethics committee to let them review and see if relaxing these ethical standards are okay. Because there is a lot of gray areas in psychology and researching people and studying people. Um, Usually, like, even if you want to do deception, it should be minimized to prevent harm. But if there is really no other way to do it without, like, let's say, invoking social desirability or unnatural reactions, and it does have great benefits, then great benefits for science, then maybe it will be okay as long as the ethics committee says okay. But of course, at the end, you should always debrief the participants and make sure that they know uh you you did deception. And even if you don't do deception, then you should still debrief them and let them know um the study, like what you're doing, how your data will be used, and take care of them if any potential harm may happen from your experiment or from the experiment. Yeah. So now we're going to reporting the results. We're just gonna gloss over this part really quickly. So data fabrication, obviously a no-no. Don't fake data. Plagiarism, obviously no-no. Don't steal other people's works as your own. Publication credit, um, have proper manners. Don't credit yourself too much. Credit people properly according to their contributions. Credit fairly. Don't undercredit. Don't overcredit. Share research data for verification. Don't be a dick and share your data to people because you're doing research for the better good. It's not a competition. It's for science and for knowledge. It's not for your own greed and personal profit. Yeah. And handling of sensitive personal information. So this is probably mostly for stuff in genetics, stuff in abnormal psychology. Like, let's say if you're handling information about genetics, um, then it should be handled with care. Because you know sometimes like when you do research, like let's say trying to find a link between genetics and risky behavior, then if you uh oh wait, that's the social implications. Sorry. I Okay, so like let's say risky behaviors such as aggression, or no, more. Let's just say more of the extreme cases like genetics and um, psychopaths and becoming psychopaths becoming violent. Yeah, I mean, it would be shocking if you suddenly find out someday after attending a research that your twin is a psychopath and you have like apparently the genetic risk of also being a psychopath is pretty high. I mean, that would be very shocking. You should be careful about that. Handle with care, and or maybe let's say you attend a research then to evaluate about your risks of depression, and it involves twins, and suddenly the researcher comes in one day and say, hey, your twin is depressed, and there's a high genetic correlation between depression and twins, and wow. Well, um, wouldn't that be a bit, uh, I don't know, uh, wouldn't that make you a bit uncomfortable? Especially if you like just never really have any expectations of being depressed, or maybe you're you have denied um maybe you're denying yourself of having mental illnesses. That might be a great shock and affect people badly. And finally, social implications, because you know how the media is, they like to overblow things and like take things out of proportion. So should you should be very careful with reporting results because it might cause. I mean, um, even without being careful, the media is already very crazy with reporting results. Like sometimes people might say, "Oh, sleep is linked with bad sleep is linked with schizophrenia," and then the media might suddenly say something like, "Oh, bad sleep causes schizophrenia, guys. Don't sleep, don't um, don't be sleep deprived." Like and like cause a lot of panic. You know, the media likes to do that, and um, basically the point is you should be more sensitive to these potential uh, media misreports and be more careful with it so they don't like maybe like at least pick better wording so the media don't distort it too much. Be try to outsmart try to outsmart the media or something like that. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to quantitative research now. Quantitative research is research using numbers. So you like measure behaviors, they turn into numbers. You um try to like process the numbers, and then you will find, oh, there's a difference between behaviors, something like that. Numbers basically, and because they use the numbers, they try to be objective, and they try to make sure it's standardized and everything, you know, because numbers. So confounding variables. Um, an important thing to be aware of when there's experimental research correlational is confounding variables, because there are a lot of variables when it comes to behavior, because behavior is complex, right? It's not just, oh, A causes B, then because there's A, then now there's B behavior. It's not like that. There's sometimes like God knows how many, maybe a lot of variables to account for, maybe like more than the 26 alphabets, until there's just so many things to consider when it comes to behavior. So because in quantitative research you don't really get into like you can't really pay attention to all these behaviors. You just try to isolate A and B together, kind of, and try to test them out to see if one causes the other. Um, there may be some confounding variables, so we have to kind of try to control, eliminate, or keep them constant so they don't cause a lot of biases or confuse our results. And this is especially in experimental research. The first type of research methods in the first type of quantitative research method. So experimental studies are studies that determine cause and effect, and um, there's a lot of a lot of types of experiments. But before we go into that, we're gonna talk about hypothesis. So normally in experimental studies, there's more of a fixed hypothesis where relationships between independent variable and dependent variable are like so like independent variable is the one that you can change, you can manipulate, and dependent variable is the result. And they try to in experimental research it's usually clear what what is being manipulated and what how that would affect the results. So there's usually two types of hypothesis. There's the experimental hypothesis, which predicts that the independent variable will affect the dependent variable, and the null hypothesis are the alternative. Wait, no, sorry. The experimental is the alternative hypothesis, and the null hypothesis is that the independent variable will have no effect on dependent variable. They don't no cause and effect. So there are two types of experimental designs. There's repeated measures design and independent. Oh wait, sorry. There's three of them. God, it's been a while. I forgot the third one. No one usually cares about the third one because it's always the first one or the second one. So yeah, there's repeated measures, there's independent measures, and matched pairs design. The repeated measures design is basically you repeat the experiment it to everyone, you know. So they do round one, round two, round three, with your different conditions. The good the good points of the good news for this is that the participant variables, the individual differences between people, that wouldn't be an issue. So that's controlled because you're comparing the same sample, right, to themselves. However, um, there may be potential issues in that, which is there might be order effect. So, meaning that because you have, let's say you have like two conditions, so maybe the first condition and second condition can affect each other. Because like, let's say for the first condition, you ask them to read read a passage about history, and in the second passage, you also ask them to read a passage about history. So maybe in the first passage they forgot history because it's been a while. It's not something that they've been reading for a while, so they read slower. And on the second round, they read faster because it's something a bit more familiar as a topic now. After doing the experiment, so this can cause like order effects if you're trying to test the speed of their reading, for example. And in order to prevent this from happening, we can counter it by counterbalancing. Basically, you flip the order. So you for some samples it's like passage A and then B, and then for some other samples, you do passage B and then passage A. And there might be demand characteristics, um, because if they do the experiment several times, they might start like guessing the purpose of the experiment and what you're trying to measure. So they won't like respond like how a normal person would respond in real life, because they would like consciously think about, oh, what they're being measured, how they're being observed. Um, and there might be possible confounding variables, because the material, let's say like reading a history passage, maybe the first one might be a bit more difficult, the other one might be a bit easier, so that might also affect the reading speed of um, the participants' reading speed. Yeah. So there's also independent measures design. So this is where um, people people are divided into, let's say, like two groups, and they are given different conditions. The good part of this is oh, actually this is not supposed to be a strength. I remember. God. Long story short, that's not supposed to be a strength. Like order effects control is not a strength, because basically, if you have, I think it should be no order of effect instead of order effect control, because yeah, it's not an issue basically if you do independent measures design, and there's potential that confounding variables can cancel each other out. This is one, because I don't know why I wrote this, but this, okay, so yeah, I still don't know why I write this, but generally speaking, it should, it, you should be using the same material, so I don't see why it cancels each other out. Um, I don't know what I was thinking, but participant variability may definitely affect the results if the sample size is small, because there's always a bit of room for error if you take a small sample to try to represent the population. And finally, matched Pairsifying, the thing that almost no experiments seem to use, because it's kind of complicated. And so this is similar to independent measures design. Um, this is where like people's abilities or people's certain characteristics are matched to each other, especially when there's like a scale comparative measure that can like rank them up, rank the particular trait or characteristic up. So people, let's say their IQ performance, their IQ levels are paired up, and then after their IQ level are paired up, they do experiments. They're given condition A or B. So this is helpful if the sample size is not large, to minimize participant variability if you know what you're doing, basically. Like if you know what possible participant variabilities may arise. Um, and it helps to replace repeated measures design if the order effect cannot be prevented, but can be fairly time consuming, and uh, I think you should definitely be more careful with this, because you should probably like know the theory or be able to justify why you want to do this, why you want to use this type of matching. Yeah. And now we're going to sampling techniques. So there is random sampling, stratified sampling, opportunity sampling, and self-selected sampling. I wish there's more pictures in here, but so, but it's okay. We're gonna go into it. So random sampling is literally randomly sampling people. This is the most ideal but most unrealistic sampling technique that you can ever use. Like, let's say like even realistically, something like a national countrywide consensus cannot take account of every single person that resides in a country. So you see, like even a big consensus that tries to sample everyone cannot take account of everyone. Then if that's if that is problematic, how are you gonna be able to randomly sample everyone perfectly? So and with their consent, with their informed consent. Yeah. So um, theoretically, it's good because it takes account of all characteristics in the target population and the representative. So it's generalizable, but uh, impractical, near impossible, and requires a big sample size. And next, stratified sampling. So stratified sampling is when you randomly you try to like um consider some characteristics in a population. Let's say there's a there's a 50-50 male female. So you try to randomly sample participants, but you also try to make sure that your participants are 50-50 male female. So it's equally represented. However, it can be a bit time consuming if there's a lot of subgroups. Like, let's say ethnicity has a lot of subgroups. If you're trying to like generalize to America, America has too much ethnicity, so that would be incredibly problematic and time consuming to manage. So yeah, next we have opportunity sampling, where the most commonly used sample involves college freshmen, especially college white male freshmen and rats. It is incredibly convenient, but lacks representativeness because college freshmen, college freshmen and rats. Yeah, how are they gonna represent the rest of the people, the different cultures, the elderly, the toddlers, everything else, the uneducated? You know, the just so many populations that aren't represented. So next we have self-selected sampling, where people, where researchers just pretty much advertise, hey, if you're looking for someone who's healthy, someone who fits the criteria who they're looking for, and they get recruited. This is effective, but oftentimes also lacks representativeness. It only like represents that small group of people who are healthy, who are in good condition, good shape, or whatever, or have like certain traits. And participants usually might join only for the sake of the money, for the sake of the gifts, because usually for self-selected, volunteers are given a certain gift or a certain amount of money in return of participating in the experiment. And next we have credibility and generalizability of quantitative research methods. There is construct validity, internal validity, external validity, and artificiality. So for construct validity, if uh it's about the operationalizations, how well the how well the measured behavior represents this particular concept that we want to explore. So, like for example, some people mention love. Wait, sorry, I mentioned love before, but there's also Zach mentioned about emotions, right? Emotions are hard to operationalize, and maybe in a lot of studies, the quality of the operationalization quality of like the concept is pretty bad because it's not. Maybe it might not represent all the definitions of an emotion. It might just only represent like a certain aspect of it. And this is usually common in like experiments where where researchers try to test your memory. Memory experiments, like they would ask you to like memorize a bunch of words on the screen. Like that's not representative of someone's memory most of the time. But experiments like that are common. So yeah, construct validity. Then internal validity is about the stuff that happens during the experiment, how well the experiment was controlled, um, how well was the method implemented. There's more of those later, and there's also external validity, which is about the outside, how the study can be generalized to other situations and people. Like there's population validity, it's how well it can be generalized to the target population, and ecological validity, how well it reflects real life situations. And finally, artificiality is when uh, you kind of question the experiment for being too artificial, for being too fake, because it in the situation could when it's unlikely to occur, or if you're trying to make absurd experiments about behavior, so you just like start to question, is this legit? Like those kind of studies with silly, really silly um behavior experiments. So now we're gonna get into internal validity, and then I'll try to check if there's any questions. So internal validity in internal validity there's a lot of biases that can occur and if possible should be minimized. There is selection is when people in the group differ because they're not randomized and because they have like pre-existing differences in their characteristics. And history is about how certain conditions during the experiment, outside like outside events, let's say like the tractor noises outside that keeps on brrr, 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 like when you're doing the experiment, that can affect participants' focus during the experiment and influencing the experiment outcomes, or different rooms used. So instead of like going to people's houses and try to do experiment at people's homes, try to get everyone to go to the same place, the lab report at the same day, or at least the same light, same settings, so to reduce events from influencing the final experiment result. And maturation is when participants perform better or perform worse because they, especially in repeated measures design, they do experiments again and again and again, or maybe they undergo some sort of training during the experiment, and that can cause participants to do better, do worse, in their progress, and that can be normal because there's no like let's say if you're scoring participants, they're not gonna get the same scores every time. It's normal for them to fluctuate performance wise. And testing effects. So this is this is for repeated measures is when you test like several times. Round one, round two, round three. So um the results in round one or what the participants think they did in round one can influence how they maybe like their attitudes for round two, and that can influence their performance in round two and round three and so on. Yeah. So that should be taken account of. And there's also instrumentation. So yeah, if you have a human that administers the experiment, then the human um that is that does the experiment, how they behave can cause the participant can affect the participant's behavior too. Maybe in the first experiment they weren't as prepared, um, and in the second experiment round they were more prepared and more professional, and that can influence the participant's behavior. Regression to the mean. So, sometimes in the first few experiments, the scores, like the behavior observed, can be more extreme, and after you repeat the experiment again and again, the statistical tendency would tend, statistically, it would tend to become more average. So, I don't think this is often used. I think a lot of these, uh, in more recent studies, I think many studies have taken account of most of these, so most of the time it's not a big issue. But maybe you might happen to find some studies that might have these issues, maybe if you're willing to spend time to read their papers and be more attentive to what they're doing specifically. Um, you never know. Experiment mortality, that's when, because the whole experimentation, human experimentation, is voluntary in nature. So sometimes in experiments, like in longitudinal experiments, where you you ask the you ask the participants to do something again, and then you ask them to do it again, follow up, they might end up dropping out, and that might affect the experiment because sometimes they might have certain characteristics, like dropouts might have certain characteristics, so that can influence the representative of the experiment. And finally, demand characteristics. So this is when participants try to guess the aim of the study, like deliberately, so they try to um, guess, oh, maybe it's about this. And when you're consciously guessing and knowing that you're being observed, that your behavior will be different than how you normally behave when you're not being observed. And there's two types of teachers: expectancy effect, degree effect, and social desirability effect. So I think it's worth it to get more into this, like as long as you know this. important. And finally, there's also researcher bias. So, researcher bias is when researchers might have expectations about the study results, and that might influence the experiment, whether it's unconscious or subconscious. So usually having someone else to administer the experiment, to do the experiment, who doesn't know about the study as well, but knows how to administer it correctly, can be helpful to prevent researcher bias. And finally, participant variability. So certain characteristics on the sample can affect the dependent variable and basically cause your experiment results not be as representative as you want, and this happens really often, especially because most experiments are well, often opportunity or self-selective in nature, because we need people consent. And now we're going to type. Oh yeah, before we go into this, is there any question? Is there a term for that when participants know the aim of the study and act according to what the researchers want? Yeah, there is a term for that. That's called the social desirability effect. 'Cause, uh, oh wait, that can also be an expectancy effect, depending on, uh, probably, okay, in your case, in your scenario, it would be the expectancy effect. So, yeah, right here it's explained that the participant tries to guess what the experimenter is trying to research about, and if the hypothesis is kind of like the relationship between hypotheses is kind of obvious, then they might try to help the researcher by giving by showing the right behaviors. So like let's say I know that when you do an when you I is it IQ experiment? I forgot. I'm really sure about it's a measurement about intelligence. There's yeah, this psychometric measurement where you have to draw something, and when you like draw something, um, the more details you have when you draw, the better it is. I forgot why it's better, but I just remember that like basically just put more details on your drawing, and that would mean something good. And if you know about something like that, know something like that, and they're doing research about this, then you might like deliberately try to draw more details on your drawings so that you can be like seen as more attentive as or more whatever they're expecting. And what is the differences between reliability, credibility, and validity? So reliability is it explained here? It's not? Okay. So reliability is when something um after you like do experiments several times, you get similar results. That is reliability. Credibility is about the trustworthiness of a study. So, trustworthiness of a study has something to do with biases, and usually it it's written right here with biases, and usually it has something to do with um it has something to do with whether it reflects real life behavior or not. I think this is something for like quantitative research methods approach. It's more about whether it reflects real life behavior. But for qualitative approach, which we'll talk about more about that, credibility is about how much like the subjectivity that exists, how much that subjectivity can reflect reality. Because when you're talking about subjectivity, it can be like, oh, his or her opinions, right? And those opinions, are they reflective of their actual behaviors or how people usually behave? That's kind of important. Or like researchers' observations. Oh, I see that people are doing this, people are doing that. Ref- is that actually reflective of real life? So they might, if there's several several researchers observing the same thing, then it would be reliable and credible. So, validity is whether um validity is more of like, is this okay or not? Is is the result valid? It is the how well something is managed. Because validity is more broad in the sense that it can be about internal validity. Is the experiment okay or not? Is the um if you generalize it to other experiments, to other situations, is it okay or not? Is the definition overall okay or not? That's validity. Yeah. So we're gonna get into. Oh, wait, I feel like time is running out so much quicker this time. Okay, we're gonna get into experiments. There is Chore experiments, the typical lab experiments. There is the quasi experiments. There's natural experiments and field experiments. So Chore experiments is when you most important, they have several criteria, okay? So they have control group, control, they should be operationalized, they should be standardized, then they should be randomized, randomly allocated. So control, clear IVDV, operationalized, standardized, like everything is controlled, the experiment procedures are all controlled, and random allocation, random assignment, randomly allocated. So it's good because if you do all of these correctly, then you can control the cause and effect. You can show cause and effect because it's standardized. It's what science wants, but because it is usually laboratory experiments, lab experiments, might be they might produce unnatural behavior because they might be doing um, lab experiments on natural behavior. Because let's say like they're measuring memory, they would try to oftentimes test people by asking them to see see a bunch of words and then memorize them, and that's not really a natural way of demonstrating your memory. There's a lot of ways to measure your memory. And in quasi experiments, This is similar to two experiments, but instead of randomly allocating people conditions, it's just the IV, the independent variable, is grouped based on trait or behavior. So culture, gender, age, and let's say females and males and their um, performances in SAT and standardized tests. That's quality experiments. They have good external validity because they're grouped into certain traits and behavior. They do the same thing. So that it's like inferring that, oh, this particular trait causes existing differences. But it's not direct causation because they might have selection bias because the existing trait and behavior can cause like participants to have different backgrounds or history. Like they might have different experiences in general, so they're already different. So they might generally be different if you do a certain thing, and that's because they have different experiences. And next we have natural experiments. Um, Natural experiments is when you try to do experiments where, let's say, someone who experienced 911 trauma and someone who does not experience 911 trauma. So you they use some of the natural variables that have happened and is outside of control and try to compare between the two groups. It has high external validity and most of the time it but it lets people to experiment on study on independent variables that cannot be manipulated, like things like stress, PTSD, or something really extreme. But because it cannot be manipulated, there's a lot of variables that might be confounding the results. And thus does not show direct causation, could be expensive intentionally and hard to replicate. And finally, field experiments are stuff that is done in the real world. Um, the IVs are manipulated, unlike the natural experiments, but the dependent variable cannot be controlled. It's kind of like experiments where the, the researcher tries to pretend to be drunk on the streets and see how people would react to the actor who's behaving drunkenly, something like that. Or the researcher tries to cross the road um, when there's a car and see if the car would stop or stuff like that. And they do it in different timing points. It may have high ecological validity because it's conducted in real life and reflects people's actual behaviors, but sometimes it might have ethical concerns because people don't know that they're being observed, no informed consent, no debriefing, um, and can't be easily replicated because there's a lot of uncontrolled variables. Next, we have this one thing that people often do, correlational studies, which is where you try to collect data and then you try to see the relationship between those two variables. There's positive correlation, where it's directly correlated. There is negative correlation. So where like something increases and then something decreases, and finally there's zero correlation, where no correlation is found. So correlation is different from causation, because in in causation there's cause and effect, right? But in correlation, it's important to see that the relationship between two variables is ambiguous. It has bidirectional ambiguity because there's no cause and effect. We don't know if A causes B. We don't know if B causes A, or maybe there's another variable C that's causing both of them, that's affecting both of them and causing them to result that way. And we can kind of skip this part about effect size and statistical significance because it really doesn't matter. But this is actually where credibility kind of comes in. But I think to save time, we're gonna skip that. Yeah, no cause and effect. Possible variable problem, and we can ignore these last two because it's not really used. And next we have sampling and generalizability for correlational. It is similar to external studies, and yeah, it is the same lab experiments basically. Finally, we have descriptive studies, but it's not that important. It's just studies that describes a certain behavior. We don't really, we don't usually talk about these studies in IB psychology. If you just go straight into the actual experiments in action or interviews in action. Now we're gonna go into qualitative research. So why is this really quantitative? Okay, I don't know what's going on in there. So qualitative research. Okay, I feel like sometimes people might think that qualitative research is better than quantitative research, but no, like sometimes people might think that quantitative research, like experiments and correlation, is better than qualitative, but that's not necessarily the case because they have like good their own spotlight. The best would obviously be to combine qualitative and quantitative because um, behavior is complex and a lot of details might be lost when you do quantitative research, when you try to quantify behavior. But in qualitative research, we can take all of nuances and put meaning to all those behaviors. Um, and usually, this is why there isn't as much of a solid hypothesis in qualitative research. And it has its own good points, like it provides rich data. Um, for complicated or sensitive issues, um, it's really good because you can like get insight to people's thoughts. Oh, also, by the way, let me know if there's any background noise that's disturbing. I'll try to move. Okay. So also, it can explain phenomenons that's not really explored yet or difficult to explore using numbers because there's more than just statistics, like there's a lot of things that statistics cannot explore, and oftentimes they can also be very misleading. We can also identify possible factors, possible causes that can be used to further do quantitative research in the future. It can generate new ideas and theories, give new insights, because you do research in depth, and people are usually studying in their own environment, which can increase solidity. However, it can be time consuming and can generate a huge amount of data. It can be very messy because you don't have a clear strategy to manage these data. There's no standardized procedure. quantify things because you have to subjectively interpret them. So that's the challenging part. Now we have sampling techniques. There is quota sampling, so you just basically continue to recruit people that you want, people with a certain characteristic that you want until you get the number of samples that you want. Just keep on hiring. There's also proposal sampling where um, maybe you have a group of people with characteristics that you want, um, and you just recruit them. You don't care about their sample size. You just recruit until you get what you want. And there's also theoretical sampling, where it's similar to purposive, but instead of recruiting and recruiting without a certain like cost, you recruit and continue to collect data until there you get no new information. Purposive is more like you don't really have any expectations, maybe because it's a new thing. Theoretical is like you recruit. Uh, you keep getting the same results. Okay, fine, I will stop. For quota, it's like I want to have a certain number of people. And for snowball sampling, you try to invite friends from the sample that you found. So you, it's easier for the researchers to find participants because sometimes if you, let's say you want to find people who, maybe you want to find homeless people or, yeah, homeless communities and understand them. It's not easy to find those kind of people, so you just ask them, hey, go invite your friends. So it's easier for the researcher to get sample. And we have finally convenient sampling, which is to easily um, easily accessible samples like college-wide male freshmen and rats. Wait, not rats this time, just college-wide male freshmen. Or maybe like your friends, your family, whatever that's easy and convenient. Finally, credibility in qualitative studies are a bit different from quantitative studies because a lot of things are very subjective, so you have to pay attention to um, how you collect and interpret data, right? Because it can be interpreted in many ways. So you have to kind of um, approach these data in different ways, whether it is through the method, through the data, through the researchers, or through the theories. Because when you, let's say you do interview, people say blah blah blah, but in reality, when you observe them, they behave in a different way. Combining several methods like this can compensate limitations and reinforce your like what's being observed. And if possible, try to get a lot of different documents that can support uh let's say like support interview results, like for example, um their diary, their personal messages if they consent to giving them to make sure to cross check and see if they're safe, and have several researchers to interpret things to see if your interpretation and their interpretation is consistent, because a lot of people have their own ways of interpreting things. And finally, using several theories, several perspectives to evaluate and interpret what's going on, because there is no wrong or right theory. There's just a more accurate and less accurate theory. And all theories can be problematic. Everything is in the gray area. Yeah. So now there's also a report. You have researchers usually should try to build rapport when they do qualitative experiments because you're facing the participants right away. You might be observing them, you might be interacting with them. So if they're uncomfortable, then they might not want to be honest with you, and or maybe if you're a stranger to them, you don't really bond with them, then they might not be willing to tell you sensitive information. In iterative questioning, this is more of this is more for interviews actually or focus groups. So you might ask sensitive questions several times, rephrase it. Maybe they might give you better insight about something. Because sometimes you ask them once, they might say A, then you ask them again, they might say B, and you can ask them again several times differently, so maybe it might get a better insight of what they want to actually mean. And reflexivity, so because you're like as a researcher, your background, your history can affect how you interpret things and how you think of something. So those kind of personal beliefs, expectations, and the knowledge that you have, like how you collect data, that can all affect biases made when you're doing qualitative research, and that can also affect credibility. Thus, it's important to do credibility checks. That also, aside from the researchers themselves, it can also involve cross-checking with the participants themselves, like just double check to see, ask and see, like try to confirm with them. Are you saying, are you really saying what you're really saying, or do you mean something else? And finally, try to describe everything as much as possible, because more details, the more details, the better. You might be skipping on something if you don't provide all the details. And finally, generalizability. It's a bit tricky, but some qualitative research can be generalizable from sample to population, from theoretical observations, like from observation to theory, and case-to-case generalizability. Theoretical generalizability. Uh, I want to talk more about theoretical generalizability. This is basically like when you find a similar observation that's let's say like interaction in social media. Yeah, social interaction in social media. That's a new concept, but social interaction is something that we've been doing for ages. So maybe researchers can try to observe or interview people about social interaction in social media and try to see how it links to real life social interaction and generalize and develop a specific theory on social interactions online because it's different, like the media is different, right? From real life interactions and case to case. Um, See if the research can be transferred to new situation, different setting, different context with people. Because sometimes interviews or like case studies, they study a specific person with a specific unique situation, and they are all very unique by themselves. So maybe you can try to see how they might link in other situations, in other special situations similar to those. Finally, there's also a lot of participant biases, um, and a lot of researcher biases. So I don't think, I think I'll leave this because you, most of the time you're not really going to be discussing about this when evaluating research. Like, most of the time you're not going to know about the content, like, of the observation or the, you don't do studies about observations, interviews often, so I feel like we can just skip this, but if anyone still want me to cover about it, feel free to let me know. We're just gonna talk about the research methods if that's more helpful. So there's observation. There is a lot of observations, different ways of observing people. There's the lab observation, there's the naturalistic observation. There's observations where people know that they're being observed or they don't. There's also observations where researchers are the participants and researchers are not the participants, so they join the group of to observe people or they just observe from afar. Um, it can also be done systematically or unstructured, so they just measure what seems noteworthy or seems interesting. So good part about this is you can actually see how people interact directly and interpret it because you can also researchers can also like fully immerse themselves and gain a rich first-hand experience, and that's how they can generate diverse data. But because it depends on what is being interpreted by the researchers, it has a lot of researcher bias. So next, interviews. Interviews are usually the data itself is usually in form of audio or video recording. So like people conversing back and forth with the researcher asking questions. Um, that's good because sometimes you can get like you can understand motives, perspectives behind why people behave in a certain way. You can talk about sensitive topics and get insight into the subjective experience. But because you're interacting directly with the participant, this can cause um, a lot of tiny nuances that can affect how the participant behaves. There's and also like basically like affect how the researcher expects the participant to do a certain thing or blah blah blah. So like both sides can affect each other. There's a lot of types of interviews too. There's the structured interviews where you just ask a bunch of questions that's already planned in advance. Um, there's also this. Oh, can someone please close their mics? Okay, I think I'm sorry, I'm gonna mute you. Okay, let's continue. So there's also semi-structured, so researchers would prepare some questions and then would ask more questions if they're interested in anything. So they have like they follow a scheme, but they also allow flexibility. And finally, unstructured interviews is where you have one topic and you go free form. Researchers just ask a lot of questions. And also have a focus group. Focus group is a special semi-structured interview with a group of people. The interview would act as a facilitator, like the person moderating the discussion, and interviewees are expected to encourage to interact with each other. This normally feels like more of a natural conversation, and having several people around can help you get information easily. Um, how and there's like great potential with multiple perspectives. However, uh, it might also cause like some dominant respondent bias, some dominant people to like speak up and not give a chance to other people to say maybe like more controversial statements or something. So this can cause conformity effect for the people who don't want to speak out as much. And sampling interview transcripts can be very demanding because there might be several people speaking at once. Very hard to transcribe. And you have content analysis. This is more about evaluating um, interview transcripts and focus group transcripts. I'm going to skip on this because it's not very useful for the exam. Then we have case study. That's good. So this is an in-depth investigation of an individual or group. This is very useful if you want to explore something that has never been explored at all, or something, a very, very unique case or situation. Um, so yeah, because it just wants to investigate somewhat in depth. This is great for someone who wants to study like special phenomenon, use multiple research methods, study someone for a very long time. Um, but because it is sensitive in nature in the sense that you study the same person in such a long time, it can be hard to ensure anonymity, confidentiality, and case-to-case generalization can be done because of how unique it is in its nature. Yeah. So that is all from today. And for research methods, feel free to ask me any more questions if you have. Like, literally any question if you have anything that you want to throw at me. Okay, that's also okay. Then if there's no more questions, then I guess it'll be the end of the session. Yeah, thank you for coming for the session today. I'll see you guys next time, or sometime.